And then the last thing I want to talk about a little bit, and then we'll do this breakout again, is page 59. And this is some of the new theory I'm developing. And I'll probably link this a little bit more as I finish this paper I'm writing, when they intervene with the facilitator responsibilities we covered yesterday. But starting with the bottom a little bit, there's a theory that I really like when I teach my persuasion class called Siller's expected utility model. And it was developed for kind of situations where you're asking for a favor. You're trying to get a friend to loan you money or loan you your car or give you a ride to the airport or something like that, right? So there's this whole literature and communication about kind of asking people for favors. And there's this whole range of strategies. Some of them are very positive strategies. You're such a great friend, and some of them are negative strategies, right? Using a guilt trip or calling in a favor or, those type of things, right? So the Siller's utility model basically said, what strategy you pick, you're calculating several different things, right? You're calculating for the factors of what strategy you pick. One is how important is it for the favor to is it like, I'd really like to go to this party, or if I don't get a ride to the airport, I don't get to go home for Christmas, or something like that, right? So how important is it, right? How important is the relationship, right? What's the potential impact on that relationship? And then fourth, which I think is very important, is how likely is the strategy to work? Right? Because part of it is you don't want to pull out the big guns, right? You don't want to go with a really bad guilt trip if it's not going to work, right? Because then you have the damage to the relationship and you still don't get the favor, right? So you're calculating in your head all these things of what am I going to use here, right? Do I get angry? Do I kind of point out the time that they didn't do something, or all that kind of stuff, right? And one of the interesting examples here is the literature also has, there's examples sometimes when you're asking for a favor that you purposely don't want the favor to be rewarded to you, because you'd rather, there's a positive impact on the relationship. Right? An example, I've never done this, but my brother goes to Las Vegas about 4 times a year. And every time he goes, he calls me and says, hey, I'm going to Vegas next weekend. If you can get out there, you can stay in my room for free, right? I'm a very busy person, and work-life balance is a stretch for me, right? I've got 3 kids. So me leaving for the weekend to Vegas would normally be a very difficult thing, right? Like, I worked so 100 hours a week, I'm going to go pay for 3 days without you. But I could potentially still ask my wife, oh, Danny's going to Vegas this weekend. Is it all right if I go? And then she'd probably say, oh, but the kids have, and then I'd say, oh yeah, that's true. Never mind, I won't go, right? But just by the fact of me asking and then being so gracious on giving up on it, right? I get a little rowdy. Right? So then next time I ask to go to Vegas, she might say, well, last time I didn't let him go, so maybe I let him go this time. So there's all these calculations you're making. So that was a little tangent, but so I'm developing a similar theory for facilitation, right? When you're deciding to intervene, what goes into that decision of what you're going to say, right? So you see it on here. What is the importance of the issue, right? How important, what's the teaching moment, right? How important is the opportunity to, so if there's a tension and someone expresses one side of the tension, using the example of the K-12 stuff, someone says, no, that's ridiculous, there's no accountability, and oh, there's an interesting tension between accountability and these other things that we want to talk about, right? And if that seems like a pretty key part of this discussion, and it's clear that this group is only seeing one side of it, I might say this is so important that I need to intervene here to try to get them to kind of explore this tension, right? So that first thing is how the importance of the issue, and part of we'll review this with the when to intervene, but with any kind of group communication, there's a whole literature on group communication. There's a task dimension, and then there's a social dimension. Right? So groups form to get something done, right? But then there's also a social dimension that the more comfortable the group with each other, the more likely they'll be able to do the task in some way, right? But the same stuff is the more they're focused on the social, they're not doing the task. There's this interesting experience I had walking around my events when groups laugh, right? We're taking on a tough issue, but then all this group is laughing, right? And part of me is thinking, okay, that's good. They're getting comfortable. They're having a good time, right? And then part of me is thinking is, okay, they're not in the groan zone if they're laughing, right? How much are they actually struggling with this issue if they're having that good of a time, right? But it's that task social dimension, because most of our groups form for 2 hours, right? They show up to an event, they sit down, they have a 2-hour experience with each other, and then they're gone. It's not an ongoing group, right? So you've probably seen the literature in terms of what norming, storming, that kind of how group development and stuff. We have 2 hours for them to develop, right? So normally I see laughter as, hey, they're starting to bond as a group, right? And hopefully they'll be able to kind of use that bonding to be able to really do the hard work later on.
Hopefully they're not laughing for 2 hours, right? Because then they're probably not doing any tasks. So that's the same thing as the importance of an issue is if you're pushing on a learning moment, if you're pushing on attention, right, you're probably working on task, but you might be giving up relationship, right? If you're identifying a tension between two people and you're highlighting it, you're going to create tension, right? It's going to be uncomfortable for people, right? They're probably going to enjoy the experience less, right? But you also feel that they're really going to learn about it, right? So as a facilitator, you're constantly kind of dealing with that tension in a way between task and so, you're not wanting I don't want people to come to my events. I want them to enjoy the experience, right? But I want them to enjoy the experience more in a fulfillment kind of way. I did hard work today, right? We really did it. We worked through that issue and said, oh, that was an enjoyable conversation, right? So that's part of it is when you're jumping in, how much reward, how much you're going to get out of it in terms of the task, then also how much relationship damage might there be to kind of bring that up, right? I'm going to skip the second one for a second. Availability of time for the intervention. This is one of the time management, right? You've got 30 seconds left before you move to something else. Don't bring up a huge issue, right? You don't have time to do that. So you always have to have time on your head. Do I have time to really explore this? If it's a tension that you want to explore and work through, that takes time, right? Potential for, I guess go back to the second one, the potential for it to resolve or occur by itself. Ideally the group does this themselves, right? Ideally a group's, I disagree with that, when you have attention, you don't want to intervene that much, right? So part of it is to what degree do I have to kind of be the one that kind of makes that, right? And then the last one, and this is really kind of where the theory develops in terms of the more experience you have as a facilitator, the more interventions you'll likely do. Because the more experience, you're likely to be able to be, you're more likely to be successful in your intervention, right? You've learned what works and what doesn't work. You've learned to take advantage of opportunities and let opportunities go when the group, you don't have time, or the group's not ready for it, right? So in some ways I teach my facilitators, I'm like, when you're new, don't take that many chances, right? It's okay to kind of let the group go, just kind of follow the process. And the nice thing about NIF and those type of things is, with the background material, with the process, a lot of it's kind of self-facilitating, right? The facilitator doesn't have to do too much, right? And a young facilitator can easily do too much and kind of derail things, right? But then when you have an experienced facilitator, especially one that really spends time being self-reflective, they're more and more likely to be able to take advantage of those opportunities that come up, right? So it's going to be a more active facilitator. And I think that's one of the reasons in my program, I'm now kind of training more active facilitators because I have a lot of time to train them, right? So if I have really good facilitators, yeah, you're going to intervene a lot more, right? You're going to take a lot more advantage. Every opportunity that comes up, you're going to take advantage of it. Right? But that likelihood of success is, am I going to be able to ask this question well? Am I going to be able to react on the fly to the reactions to it to actually take advantage of it? Right? But that, from the Slur's expected utility model, that likelihood of success is important. I don't want to ask a question and then it actually harm the conversation. So then on top, I won't walk all the way through this, but you just kind of see some of the specific reasons to intervene. We've seen that, opportunity for learning, that's the big one for us, right? Here's a chance here, like I talked about with the definition of deliberation, this is about refining people's opinions. It's not just people having a chance to express their opinion. We want people to learn and react to each other and have those aha moments, right? So facilitators are particularly kind of looking for those chances. Ground rules being violated, this doesn't happen too often, right? When the facilitator has to remind people of the ground rules, right? That they need to be respectful. Probably the only ground rule that you have to remind people of sometimes is the be brief thing, right? That you might want to say, we want to make sure everyone gets this talk here, trying to kind of calm down the dominator. Lack of clarity or mutual understanding. So the facilitator needs to kind of try to be the dumb person in the group. When everyone's using an acronym or a term, so I use K-12, right? And you had to ask K-12, right? So facilitator, when everyone's using an acronym, I'm sorry, I wasn't at all. I was talking about the acronym. I should have as a facilitator, but whenever even if you know the acronym as a facilitator, right? If you can assume someone else in the room doesn't, right? The other people, it was good that you asked. You didn't know when you asked, right? Most people wouldn't, right? Because I don't want people to not know that I don't know that, right? So a facilitator is the one that, or same thing when people use terms, right? When, like justice and big words that mean different things to different people, right? The facilitator might want to say, well, what does that word mean to you, right? So you're the one in charge of that. Part of your job is to make sure there's mutual understanding and comprehension. People understand each other. So you need to be the one that jumps in and says, "Oh, make sure we're on the same page here. What do you mean by that? Or what is that acronym? Okay, you just said ACT. What is ACT here? Okay, so that's part of your job. Why you did intervene sometimes. Adjusting pace and time management. So a lot of your interventions is how much time we have left. We need to almost move on, and so forth. And then opportunity to improve group dynamics or honor democratic attitudes. This is in some guys when you're intervening for the sake of the relationship, right? If someone's being, the ground rule of being respectful, you don't re-mention that ground rule that much, right? But you are in charge of making sure people feel comfortable, right? One of the tough ones is when someone uses a derogatory term or an offensive term, to what degree do you jump in, right? And kind of push back on that. Sometimes you might just reframe it, you paraphrase, but you take that term out, right? So it makes it a little bit more, but part of your responsibility is keeping that group safe. Right? But there's a tension with that. I do a lot of free speech stuff, right? That if you can create a chilling effect when you really kind of, especially like talking about issues, like tough issues like race and that kind of stuff, it's so hard to talk about that, right? That if people are scared to say any of the wrong words, it really cuts off conversation, right? So we often, when we do something like on race or really kind of tough issues, we'll add some of the ground rules, like assume best intentions, right? It's like, let's not worry too much about if people are using words, don't put too much meaning into that. And for a while here, let's try. But that's a tough kind of line to draw in a sense, right? That we don't want people to feel kind of uncomfortable with it. But that's that last kind of intervention is you're really thinking about those group dynamics and making sure people